talking a little bit about what the Pensions Advisory Service do, because from my experience, people may know a little bit about what we do, but very few people know about everything that we do. So I'm going to start off doing that, and then I'm going to share with you the insights we get from the huge number of calls, and that was before Wednesday, that we get from people at retirement. We have two customer-facing services. The first thing that we do is we provide free information and guidance to the public on pension matters. And the second thing that we do, which we're probably better known for, is we help by resolving disputes that members have with their pension schemes. Our information and guidance service, which is based in Victoria, is a helpline, not a call centre. And I say that because I do want to emphasise the fact that if you phone the Pensions Advisory Service, you would speak to somebody who's got typically 10 years' worth of pensions experience. We recruit mainly from the employee benefit consultancies and from in-house pension schemes. People like that come to work for us. We deal with roughly 80,000 customers, well that's how many we'll probably deal with when we end our company year in 31st of March 2014. And that's split between telephone calls, web chats. We only started in August, and we are now up to 100 web chats a day. It's incredibly popular, it's an incredibly efficient form of communication, because of course if we're speaking to somebody on web chat and they've got a benefit statement in front of them, we don't have to get them to explain what's on the statement. Not all of them are as good as United Utilities, where you can easily see what the fund value is, but they can just take a photo on their phone and they can just zap it across to us so we know what sort of scheme that they're talking about. So that's becoming increasingly popular, and also because of the privacy factor, that you can do that wherever you are and it's private. We deal with 12,000 online inquiries and about 3,000 first-party complaints, which I'll explain a little bit about at the moment. So that's what we do on the helpline. Those were written before Wednesday. We're probably going to be slightly up on the year because we're certainly dealing with sort of double volumes of calls at the moment. On the dispute resolution, we have roughly 6,000 what people perceive as complaints coming into our office every day. Of those, we have a look at them and we split them up into what we describe as first-party and third-party complaints. The first-party ones, which I referred to in the information and guidance slide, is when we look at a complaint from a member. He's really grumpy with his scheme, really fed up with his provider, and he's really cross, and he's written to us to tell us he's cross. We'll have a look at it, and sometimes he may not have actually lost out. He may have misunderstood what he'd been told. He may feel he wasn't told it very well. But what we do as an independent body is we phone them up and say, look, we want to talk you through what's happened, what's gone on, and we want to show to you that you actually haven't lost any money, and as a result, there isn't a complaint to answer to. And most of those people are very grateful. They say, thanks a lot, you've explained it to me now, I understand. Unfortunately, 2,500 are genuine complaints, and we will then work with the member and also the scheme or the provider to try and resolve those complaints. They range from everything like retirement, the decisions made at retirement, they didn't feel they were well explained, pension transfers taking too long. One of the big sources of complaints that we have is overpayments. So where a pension scheme, and sometimes the administrators, it's not their fault, it might be the member's fault, has been paying out too much money. The administrators do have a tendency to write to say, you owe us £3,000. The member goes into meltdown and contacts us. And what we'll do is we'll talk to the member, find out about his financial circumstances and his ability to repay the money, and actions he's taken that he may not have otherwise taken if he didn't think he was on that level of income. And then we'll speak to the scheme. And I think we're very fortunate because of our 30-year reputation in doing that. Most schemes are happy to have that conversation with us and we'll agree some sort of settlement between the scheme and the member. And we do that because we're independent and impartial, and like I said, we've got a reputation for doing it. So let me just quickly now move on to the main meat of what I'm going to talk about, which is what's the issue? The issue has changed slightly since I wrote these slides. We'll talk a little bit about that. Talk about the insights that we get from the people that call us up, the sorts of queries that we get from people at retirement, And then finally, something that I think is really relevant is what help do we think is needed? And when I get onto that point, I will talk a little bit about what we think needs to be delivered with this new flexibility that's been introduced by the government. And I'll just finish off to say how we can help you in this room, your members, when you need help. So what's the issue? I'm going to run through this really quickly because I think we all know it. The shift of responsibility is absolutely massive. Ros actually picked up on this, and I don't think it's been picked up a huge amount in the press comment, but this private pension reform that we saw happen on Wednesday goes hand in hand with the state pension reform with the single-tier pension. And the really hard message out there is there's a really low safety net, and that's it. Means testing go. So, you know, the sort of the remarks that were made about buying a Lamborghini, you can if you want, but then you're down to the really base level of income for the rest of your life. And that hard message needs to get across to people that this is the new brave world, and it is down to individual responsibility. Work and retirement has been blended, and Steve mentioned this, not always very beneficial from the company's perspective, but we certainly see it from the course that we take, is that it's very fluid. Funnily enough, from the course that we take, people do have a policy document, let's say for a pension scheme provider or an old scheme that they were a member of, that says 65 on it. And they think that's the only time they can take their benefit. That's what the members think. And they sit there and they wait for it. And we take a number of calls where people say, I've reached 65, so I've got to take my benefits. And we go, why? What do you want? And we should sort of try to make that connection. I'm also afraid to say that because of that sort of fixed mindset about I've got a policy document that says age 65, is we've seen an awful lot of pension liberation cases which are before the age of 55. So some cases that we're working on at the moment, most of the people that have been liberated out of their existing pension scheme are over the age of 55, and they could have done it all through their main scheme, but they just didn't know because the policy document said 65. The other thing is obviously multiple jobs prior to retirement, and more choices and more dilemmas that people are going to have at retirement. And boy, do they have choices now. And whilst we absolutely welcome and support the flexibility, it's going to be so important that people get help. I'll pass over the slide which gives sort of the details of the numbers of people involved and also the levels of income that we're talking about. But just move on to, I guess, the main insights that we have from the calls that we take. Most people do know that there is an issue that they do need to provide for their retirement. You know, we do get people that phone us up that go a little bit crazy at first, say, I can't afford it, or, you know, what are they saying, or it's a waste of money. But actually, after a few minutes on the telephone, most people do know that it's up to them, and they just don't know what to do about it. They're often confused and overwhelmed from the information that they've received. They don't understand the language that's used. Some documents are better than others. Some of them are completely incomprehensible that we send out to members. But even documents that are really well written, you have to put so much information in them, it can be quite overwhelming, based on the fact that most people can now only read what appears on the screen of an iPhone, and then their concentration lapses. People are unaware of the options they've got, and Ros picked this up in her talk, that before, you know, people did actually think the only choice was an annuity, and that was the choice they had to make, what type of annuity. They didn't know they could do other things. They think the problem is too big, and I would also say that a lot of people phone us up because they can't afford advice. That's the words they use to us. Sometimes that is a perception, and I think if they did the cost-benefit analysis, and we sometimes talk to them about what the benefits are of receiving advice, they would see very clearly that it would pay for itself after only a couple of years if they've received that advice. I'm afraid a lot of people do not trust the suppliers, and they do want some validation, and they want some independent advice. And sometimes that is based on the fact that they might have received a poor service, errors or poor communication, or they just may not be in contact with the original company or the original scheme that they were part of. So our at-retirement queries that we receive, like I said, we get about 80,000 customers a year, of which 15% are at retirement. And all those things that I've already mentioned are the sorts of queries that they have about their pension scheme. But I guess the biggest one that I wanted to draw out on this slide is understanding the gap between where we as an industry, schemes and providers start communicating with the individuals and where the individual is in their understanding. And I think Steve sort of mentioned some of this during the course of his talk. We get people that phone us up and say, I've been with this pension company for 20 years and I had a pension with them, and now they've written to me to tell me it's over. What's all that about? They thought they had a pension, and they thought in the DB mentality that was all just going to roll over into an income in retirement. They had no idea that they had to make a choice because they were actually in a stakeholder or a personal pension plan. And the other thing is there's some practical issues. We have gone crazy in this world over personal identification, and I could go on about this for ages because I'm sure all of us have suffered it. But it's a real issue for a lot of people. So, you know, there's a man that's doing a labouring job, he's got a pension, he's got to deal with his retirement. He says to his wife, could you have a look at it? Could you phone up and ask a few questions? She phones up, says, I've got a few general questions. They say, I can't talk to you, you're not policy holder. So she says, oh, I just wanted to ask a few questions. Can't talk to you, you're not policy holder. Well, what time are you open till? 5 o'clock. Well, that's useless. So we get a lot of people that phone us up because people aren't prepared to answer questions for them. So I think too many options, and people do need to be stepped through the process. But most importantly, a lot of people are just saying, and we said this actually before we started, people just sort of say, what about me? Could you just tell me, what would you do in my position? And people want and are seeking out some form of assistance. So what help do we think is needed? The first one, and I was delighted to hear Steve said this, is time. The decisions are complex and people need to give themselves time, and people don't. A lot of the decisions are forced upon them because they phone us up. They say, I'm just about to go to retirement and I could really do, can you tell me what the options are and what you could do? And we say, well, when are you retiring? Oh, next week. Right, okay. And I really need the tax-free cash fund then, and I really need this, and I really need that. Do you really need it? Yes, I do. So we said, well, these are the options, but this could take 4 weeks to actually go through this process. If you get advice, they need to talk to you. You need to go away and think about things. So this could take, a month, 2 months, at the very shortest. Well, I haven't got time. I'll just go back to the insurance company and I'll convert it, they say to us. So giving people the time to do this, and I very much hope that with the new government proposals, that the guidance is offered early enough and not just before retirement. The second thing is the language is impenetrable. So either the scheme, the administrators on the scheme side, or somebody needs to translate it for them. I think it's quite difficult, particularly for the insurance company providers sometimes to actually work out what language needs to be used. And so therefore I do think they probably need a translator for somebody to explain some of the different words that are used in simple terms as to what it means. Access. People are really reluctant to ask. Our helpline is really British. And people phone us up and go, I'm really sorry to phone you, but I was wondering if you could help me, and I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time. And we do get loads of apologies. We keep saying to people, that's what we're here for. But people are really reluctant. And so again, something that I really hope comes in as part of the new guidance is I hope that the guidance service is actually phoning the people up and saying, look, I'm phoning you up because this is what we do. We provide you with help at retirement, and I think that's really important. And if you're working with your members, I think it needs to be, they need to be brought into the party and told, come along, it's good for you. And when you're there, you'll probably enjoy it. It needs to be a step-by-step conversation. Don't try and have this conversation all in one go. I'm a little bit fearful about the 30-minute conversation and trying to cram it in 30 minutes. In fact, I prefer lots of 15-minute conversations, minimum of 2, perhaps 4 type 15-minute conversations so people can digest the information, go away and think about it, and then come back and have another conversation. It has to be holistic. Now, something that organisations like Wealth at Work and ourselves can benefit from is doing the holistic piece. Of course, people do get really frustrated because they go along to a pensions talk, or they go and phone up their pension provider and say, oh, can I do this? Oh, by the way, I've got another policy. Can I do it with that? And then they say, oh, I can't talk to you about that. And so people do have 2 or 3 sources. Some industries are unusual in this position, but for most people, you will find that they are going to have, at the moment, 4 or 5 different pensions when they retire, and very soon that's going to be closer to 10 or 12. And finally, it's just about the what about me. And I think, people are sort of saying to me, what about me? I'm not going to read 30 pages. I'm not going to read all about all of the options. If I just tell you a little bit about what I'm doing, could you filter out the choices for me? What meets my needs and the life decisions I need to make? I have to say, we probably have to force that point. The hardest of all of the things I've put out there is because actually a lot of people sort of say, I've got a policy and they told me I need to shop around, can you tell me how to do that? And we tend to have to unpick them to say, no, let's talk about what you want. In fact, yesterday I was answering telephone calls on the new legislation, although in fact most of them weren't on new legislation, they were just about pensions in general. And there were things like, I'm 69 and I just found a pension that I haven't taken benefits from, so I think I should take it. And we sort of say, well, why? Do you need the money? Why haven't you taken it already? Let's just sort of unpick it a little bit and understand what you need first before we start talking about product. So I just wanted to finish and finally sort of how can we help schemes, how can we help members? Well, quite often I think questions lead to questions, and one of the missions that we're on at the Pensions Advisory Service is to talk to the industry, to scheme administrators, to trustees, to say, when you reach the limit of what you're doing, and the person wants to talk about their other pension arrangements, and that question leads to another question, please don't say, I can't help you. Please say, I can't help you, but the Pensions Advisory Service can look at all of your pension arrangements and provide you with guidance. We would like to be flagged up more during communication exercises. You are the biggest source of customers that we get, and we're really grateful for the schemes that do the nudging, because going back to my point about people don't like to ask. So we're really grateful for the schemes that sort of really push people to us to say, you should go and have a chat with these people. I've helped you, but these people can help you. Used as an independent body and as a validator, and I say this particularly in connection with pension liberation, if any of you do think that one of your members could be possibly being sucked into a pension liberation scheme, and indeed administrators of schemes where this is happening, and the member's just really cross with you because you're taking a long time, and you would do that, wouldn't you? You're just hanging on to my money. We would say just push them through to us, because we can say we're independent. If they are taking a long time, we'll tell you. But if they're actually doing it because there's a really serious reason behind it, we'll explain that to you as well. Final thing is there is an internal dispute resolution process that all of you will have in your schemes. And one of the hardest jobs that we have in mediation is when you've been going through that process for 6 months and the 2 of you are at loggerheads. Now, you probably know the members in your scheme that are just going to keep on banging away with that question and they can't see what you're saying. And when things happen like that, we can quite often say to you, don't go all the way through the process without us getting involved, because we can help during the internal dispute resolution process, as well as mediating after the process. And one of the hardest jobs we have is when you've had a member who's been, maybe you think, unreasonable for 6 months and just, firing away quite abusive communication to you just because he doesn't understand, and the member feels the same way about you. Actually having an independent party involved in that process, helping you write the letters, I think speeds up the process, because we can help the member explain to him what's going on from an independent perspective as well, and that can massively help. And like I said, the hardest mediation that we have to do is just when both parties are just really fed up with each other. We can help when you're raising awareness for pensions, so I was really interested in some of the stuff that Steve was putting up and some of the exercises that he's going through. And if you like, as soon as you start opening the door, a bit like the government did on Wednesday, the government opened the door on Wednesday, we've been bombarded with phone calls, not necessarily all about the budget changes, but it just opened up the door and people started talking about their pension. And when you're doing that and people then start thinking about their pensions in general beyond your scheme, we can help. So our big plea for the industry, for everybody, for Wealth at Work, for you as administrators of schemes and trustees of schemes, we would say, let's just all as an industry say, I can't help, I know somebody who can, because as an industry we should really join up the process for the members. So just finally, before I sit down, a few words I was going to say about the new budget rules. We are really pleased, and there's been a lot of campaigning that is now being rewarded by the flexibility we've got in the pension scheme. But guidance is going to be imperative. We see that there's three elements to the jigsaw. There's information, and that has to be very copious. There's lots and lots of information. It's brilliant when people find ways of communicating a lot of information in a better and smarter and quicker way and getting the message across. There is then advice, which again we think is absolutely fantastic, and we signpost a lot of people to actually receive one-to-one advice. However, the big bit in the middle, which is what the government has committed to do, is to provide guidance. We see all of those three things should work complementary and are not in competition with each other. But the guidance element of it will sometimes give people enough to be able to act. But sometimes, once you've had guidance, you do really realise the importance of advice. And that's one of the things that we would say that is so important in this guidance, and we're going to be putting a lot of effort to try and get this to be right, to make sure that people do understand that advice is maybe what they need, but when they arrive at the advisor, they're not there just fishing and wondering, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to pay for this because I didn't think we had to pay for advice, etc. But they arrive there thinking, I do know what advice is about, I do know that I need it, and I am prepared to pay for it. The government can't go that far. They are going to provide the guidance, and I really hope that they offer a good quality guidance service covering some of the points I've discussed today. Thanks very much.